Hello, my name is Frank. In this video, I will share with you one story but written in three different levels. What I want you to do is to listen to all three different levels, and in the end, let me know which level was easy for you to understand. For example, you'll have a story written at A1 level, which is a beginner level. Then a second version will be B1. So go ahead and listen to this story at B1 level, which is an intermediate level. Then the third version will be C1. Also go ahead and listen to the story at this level. Then in the end, in the comment section, let me know which level was easy for you to understand.
Carlos sat at his computer and looked at his email. He received another rejection email, and this was the 46th rejection. He felt sad and hopeless, but he had one more interview tomorrow. This was his last chance to find a job, and he needed this job very much. Carlos came to America 6 months ago, and he could not speak English well. He studied English every day, but he still struggled with conversations. He applied to many jobs and he got many rejections. People said his English was not good enough, and this made him feel bad. The next morning, Carlos woke up early and felt nervous. He practiced his answers all night, and he tried to remember important words. He put on his best suit, and he looked in the mirror. He told himself that he could do this, but he still felt scared. Carlos arrived at the office building, and he walked inside. The building was very tall and beautiful, and many people walked around him. He found the elevator, and he pressed the button for floor 15. His heart beat fast, and he felt his hands shake. Carlos entered the interview room, and he saw three people sitting at a table. They smiled at him, and they asked him to sit down. The first question was easy, and Carlos answered it well. But then they asked him to tell them about himself, and Carlos forgot everything he practiced. Carlos felt panic inside his chest, and his mind went completely blank. He could not remember any English words, and he could not speak. The interviewers waited quietly, and Carlos felt embarrassed. He wanted to run away, but he knew he could not do that. Carlos closed his eyes for a moment, and he took a deep breath. He thought about why he came to America, and he remembered his dream. He thought about his family back home, and he remembered their support. He opened his eyes, and he decided to speak from his heart. Carlos started speaking slowly, and he told them about his journey. He talked about coming to America with hope, and he talked about learning English every day. He talked about his determination to succeed, and he talked about never giving up. The words came naturally, and he felt more confident. The interviewers listened carefully, and they nodded their heads. They asked him more questions, and Carlos answered them honestly. He did not use perfect English, but he communicated clearly. He showed them his passion and his hard work, and they could see his determination. At the end of the interview, Carlos shook their hands, and he thanked them. He walked out of the building, and he felt proud of himself. He did not know if he would get the job, but he knew he did his best. He spoke from his heart, and that was enough. 2 days later, Carlos received an email, and he opened it nervously. The email said congratulations, and Carlos got the job. He felt happy and excited, and he called his family immediately. He proved that determination matters more than perfect English, and he achieved his dream. Carlos sat at his computer and stared at the screen, reading another rejection email that arrived in his inbox. This was the 46th rejection he had received since arriving in America 6 months ago, and each one felt like a punch to his confidence. However, he had one more interview scheduled for tomorrow morning, and this was truly his last chance to find a job before his savings ran out completely. When Carlos first came to America, he knew his English was not perfect, but he believed that hard work and determination would be enough. He studied English every single day, practicing conversations with strangers and watching English videos late into the night. Despite all his efforts, employers kept telling him that his English was not good enough for their positions, which made him question whether he would ever succeed in this new country. The night before the interview, Carlos could not sleep because his mind was racing with worry. He practiced his answers over and over again, trying to memorize perfect responses to common interview questions. He rehearsed how to describe his work experience, his skills, and his goals for the future. However, no matter how much he practiced, he still felt unprepared and anxious about what would happen the next day. The next morning, Carlos woke up before sunrise and put on his best suit, which he had carefully ironed the night before. He looked at himself in the mirror and tried to give himself a pep talk, telling himself that he was capable and that this time would be different. However, as he drove to the interview, his hands shook on the steering wheel and he could feel his heart beating rapidly in his chest. When Carlos arrived at the tall office building downtown, he took a deep breath and walked inside, trying to appear confident even though he felt terrified inside. He found the elevator and pressed the button for the 15th floor, watching the numbers light up as the elevator climbed higher and higher. When the doors opened, he walked down a long hallway and found the interview room, where 3 people were already waiting for him. The interview started well enough, with Carlos answering simple questions about his background and experience. However, when one of the interviewers asked him to tell them about himself, something unexpected happened. Carlos's mind went completely blank, and he could not remember a single word he had practiced the night before. He sat there in silence, feeling panic rise in his chest as the interviewers waited patiently for his response. Carlos felt embarrassed and wanted to run away, but he knew that he could not give up now. He closed his eyes for a moment and took several deep breaths, trying to calm his racing heart. In that moment of silence, he thought about why he had come to America in the first place, remembering his dreams and the sacrifices his family had made to support him. He thought about all the nights he had spent studying English, and he realized that he had already come so far. When Carlos opened his eyes again, he made a decision to stop trying to be perfect and instead speak from his heart. He started talking slowly, telling them about his journey from his home country to America, about the challenges he had faced learning a new language, and about his determination to build a better life. He did not use perfect grammar or sophisticated vocabulary, but he spoke with honesty and passion, and the words flowed naturally from his heart. The interviewers listened carefully, and Carlos could see that they were genuinely interested in what he had to say. They asked him more questions, and this time Carlos answered them honestly, sharing both his strengths and the areas where he was still learning. He showed them his passion for his work, his willingness to learn, and his determination to succeed, and they could see that these qualities mattered more than perfect English. At the end of the interview, Carlos shook their hands and thanked them for their time, feeling proud that he had not given up, even when things seemed impossible. As he walked out of the building, he did not know if he would get the job, but he felt a sense of accomplishment because he had faced his fear and spoken from his heart. 2 days later, when Carlos received an email offering him the position, he realized that sometimes being authentic and determined matters more than being perfect. Carlos sat at his computer, staring blankly at the screen as yet another rejection email materialized in his inbox, marking the 46th time he had been told that his qualifications were not quite right, or that his English proficiency was insufficient for the position. This particular rejection felt especially crushing because it came from a company he had been particularly excited about, and with his savings rapidly dwindling and rent due in 2 weeks, tomorrow's interview represented not just another opportunity, but quite literally his last chance to secure employment before facing financial disaster. When Carlos had first arrived in America 6 months earlier, he had been filled with optimism and determination, believing wholeheartedly that his work ethic and willingness to learn would overcome any language barriers he might encounter. He had dedicated countless hours to improving his English, enrolling in evening classes, practicing conversations with native speakers he met at coffee shops, and consuming English media voraciously in an attempt to immerse himself in the language. Despite these extensive efforts, however, the job market had proven far more unforgiving than he had anticipated, with employers consistently emphasizing the importance of flawless communication skills over other qualifications. The night before what he knew would be his final interview opportunity, Carlos found himself unable to sleep, his mind racing through potential questions and rehearsed responses that he had meticulously prepared. He had spent hours crafting what he believed were perfect answers to common interview questions, memorizing industry-specific vocabulary and practicing his pronunciation until his throat felt raw. Nevertheless, as he lay awake in the darkness, a nagging sense of inadequacy gnawed at him, and he could not shake the feeling that no amount of preparation would be sufficient to overcome the fundamental barrier of his imperfect English. The following morning, Carlos awoke before dawn, his anxiety having prevented him from achieving anything resembling restful sleep. He carefully selected his best suit, which he had taken to a professional cleaner the previous week, and spent an inordinate amount of time ensuring that every detail of his appearance was impeccable. Standing before the mirror, he attempted to project confidence through his reflection, repeating affirmations about his capabilities and worth, but the tremor in his hands betrayed the fear that was consuming him from within. As Carlos navigated the morning traffic toward the downtown office building where his interview would take place, he could feel his heart pounding against his ribcage with such intensity that he worried the interviewers might be able to hear it when he entered the room. The building itself was an imposing glass structure that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the sky, and as he stepped through the automatic doors into the polished marble lobby, he felt small and insignificant, like an imposter who did not belong in such a professional environment. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt interminable, each floor number that lit up on the display panel seeming to mark another moment of his impending judgment. When the doors finally opened, Carlos found himself in a corridor, lined with closed office doors, and he followed the directions he had been given until he reached the conference room where 3 interviewers were already seated around a polished wooden table, their expressions neutral and professional as they gestured for him to take the empty chair across from them. The initial portion of the interview proceeded smoothly enough, with Carlos responding competently to questions about his educational background and previous work experience. However, when one of the interviewers, a woman with kind eyes and a warm smile, asked him to tell them about himself, something entirely unexpected occurred. Despite having rehearsed this exact question dozens of times the previous night, Carlos's mind went completely blank, as if someone had erased all the carefully memorized responses from his memory. He sat there in stunned silence, feeling the weight of 3 pairs of eyes upon him, and in that moment he experienced a wave of panic so intense that he genuinely considered excusing himself and fleeing the room. Instead of giving in to his instinct to escape, however, Carlos closed his eyes and took several deliberate measured breaths, forcing himself to slow down his racing thoughts. In that moment of quiet desperation, he found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this point, the sacrifices his family had made to support his dreams, the countless hours he had spent studying English when he could have been relaxing, and the unwavering determination that had carried him through 46 rejections without completely losing hope. He realized that he had been approaching this interview all wrong, trying to present a polished, perfect version of himself rather than allowing his authentic self to shine through. When Carlos opened his eyes and looked directly at the interviewers, he made a conscious decision to abandon his rehearsed script and speak from his heart instead. He began slowly, his words initially hesitant, as he told them about his journey from his small hometown to this moment, about the challenges he had faced in learning a new language while simultaneously trying to build a new life, and about the dreams that had sustained him through every setback. He did not attempt to use sophisticated vocabulary or complex grammatical structures. Instead, he spoke with raw honesty and genuine passion, allowing his determination and work ethic to come through in the sincerity of his words. The transformation in the room was palpable as the interviewers leaned forward, their expressions shifting from professional neutrality to genuine interest. They began asking follow-up questions, and Carlos found himself answering them with increasing confidence, sharing not just his strengths, but also his areas of growth and his commitment to continuous learning. He demonstrated his passion for his field, his resilience in the face of adversity, and his understanding that success is not about perfection, but about persistence and authenticity. As the interview concluded and Carlos shook hands with each of the interviewers, thanking them sincerely for their time and consideration, he felt a profound sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with whether he would receive a job offer. He had faced his greatest fear, the fear of not being good enough, and had discovered that his value lay not in perfect English, but in his character, his determination, and his willingness to be vulnerable and authentic. 2 days later, when the email arrived offering him the position, Carlos understood that sometimes the greatest strength we can bring to any situation is simply the courage to be ourselves, imperfections and all.
If you've listened to the story in three different levels, first of all, congratulations. Second, I would like you to drop in the comment which level was easy for you to understand. And then let me know which level would you like me to drop more of this type of content. Thank you so much for supporting this channel.